So yeah, let's talk about your work. Written 100 plays. How many novels have you written?
Uh, I probably got somewhere like 25 or 30. I've got
Around
about
25 to 30.
I got about 12 to 15 short story collections, probably 250, probably around 300 short stories. There's probably about 1,300 or so essays that I wrote on Cosmoetica out of the 16 or 1,700 up there. Um, uh, I I mentioned Bruce Ariel having 63 great poems. Uh, I could show you.
Yeah.
I've got a PDF that someone scanned in of all of my poems. It's about
Oh my.
3,400 pages. So I would say I think I have just a little over 1,000 great poems. And
I,
again, in
I,
many different. What?
I was afraid to ask you how many poems you've written. Uh,
I mean, I've written probably over 20,000, but the first
yeah.
9 years was not particularly good, with a few
Right.
exceptions. That would be considered juvenilia. I was once contracted by a subsidy press to write a poem for them, and I did, and then they didn't want to publish it. But I don't want to mention the press because apparently they're very litigious, even 35 years on.
Oh my gosh. So you started your poetry was your first foray into the arts, correct?
And I wrote to try to woo this girl that I had gone to high school with.
Yeah.
Uh, it it turned out that my guess is that she was abused as a child because she was going with a guy who was like 25 years older than her when she was a teenager. So
Uh, well, and you said you just like went to the library and found like a book
yeah,
of
I
love
just I
poems.
just these types of books. Let me show you this. Here's an old anthology book that my mom actually had. If you see, great poems of the English
Oh
language.
wow.
And so this is probably from the 1920s. William
How
Rose
many how
Benét.
many good poems are in there?
I mean, there. I mean, it's a lot of the big names, but
Yeah.
this was probably published in the 20s or 30s. So you're probably not. You wouldn't even gotten someone like a Wallace Stevens. Probably Emily Dickinson is where it would end.
Okay. So I've just recently started reading poetry, and
Mhm.
I was always bored with it because the poetry we read like in school was not interesting to me.
Well, what are you
It
talking? The
wasn't.
Walrus and the Carpenter type poetry?
Yeah, and even some like Edgar Allan Poe,
Uh-huh.
like we'd read a lot of that. But I would say like some of the, and I don't know if you like it, but one of the first ones that struck me was Bukowski because how much he reminded me of Tom Waits' music.
Hmm.
Um, because I'm a big music fan. That was my first foray into arts. I like made some music. There's no success or anything like that, but I've messed around with making music for sure. Um, and Bukowski, and then Rainer Maria Rilke. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Yeah, you got it, Rilke.
Yeah, and then recently I've heard you talk about Robinson Jeffers, and I started reading him, and he's really, really good. And you, I like your poems a lot.
Well, but again, liking them is good, but understanding
Yeah,
why they're good or great is
yeah,
better.
yeah.
And there's a good example. Like not only do I have a lot of sonnets, but I've done sonnets, for example, on criminals, serial killers. I've done
Mhm.
sonnets. I
I've seen your
did
video
what?
about the. I've seen the video, the almost documentary, I guess, of when you write the Ed
Oh
Gein
yeah,
poem.
yeah. And so and I'll tell you, that's probably if they were to ever send 10 hours of videos or something up to the stars, they should include that video because I know of no
I
other.
consider that a great film.
Well, yeah, I know of no other artist who has ever created a work of art on film in real
Yeah,
time.
yeah. I
And
consider that a great film.
yeah,
And in the way you are able to communicate your thoughts while you do it, I think is what makes it so good.
and
Um,
I've said to Alex that if this Bruce documentary takes off, there's a guy named James Emanuel, a black poet that he wants to do. There's a fellow that was in the Uptown Poetry Group I ran with Bruce and
yeah.
I, named Don Moss, who probably has the best long poem since Hard Cranes the Bridge. But if
Mhm.
they did something on me, I other than a standard documentary, I told them what we need to do is me to take a week, 7, 9 days off or something, I'll write
Yeah.
a play. Forget about just a sonnet. I'll write a play in 25 or 30 hours, and you can film the whole 25, 30 hours, and I'll go through it. This
I'll do it.
well, sure.
Like seriously, that sounds like a great idea. All I need is some money and a flight and a place to stay. I have a
Well,
camera.
you can stay with me and Jessica, and
Yeah.
I mean, just put on.
I mean, yeah. So I've never made a documentary. I've told you I'm thinking about making one this summer. Well, I wouldn't say I've never made a documentary. I've made like small ones, like in school, just about like little things happening at school. And I used to make. When I was younger. Okay. So this is another thing. You wrote a poem about superstar Billy Graham.
Oh yeah.
And,
Actually,
did you like wrestling?
actually, hold on. I just want to show you something. I'm actually. Where do I have it? Oh. I'm actually planning to do a book on superstar Billy Graham.
Hell yeah. Okay. He's awesome and gets where Hulk Hogan is the guy who gets all the praise. Superstar Billy Graham created the entire character. So I think that's a great idea for a book. Is that what do you think about the Superstar Billy Graham and Hulk Hogan? What do you think about that?
Well, I did actually a novel on Gorgeous George, the wrestler from the 40s.
Oh,
and 50s.
really? Can you send that to me?
Yeah, let me write this down before I forget.
Yeah.
Gorgeous George novel to Destiny. And by the way, I've heard the name Destiny for a girl. Is that the male version of Destiny? There's
a city in Florida named Destin.
Oh, okay.
And I'm named after that city. That's where my parents like to vacation.
Okay.
It's a great deep sea fishing and good seafood. Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I lived in New York until I was 26, and so I would watch the WWWF then back in the 70s, where you basically had a lot of guys named Moose who were big fat guys with hairy arms, and they wear the whole full leotard.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, I went to a high school called Franklin K. Lane High School from 80 to 83. In the 70s, a few years before that, though, and if you're writing that, Wikipedia, if you look at the Wikipedia page on me, they fuck up everything.
Yeah. Who wrote that? I read that.
A lot of people have done, and they get.
Because these are things I need to get right for my story. You know what I mean? Because it's more
I
of a
was
feature
born
about
in
you.
Yeah, I was born in New York City in Booth Memorial Hospital. I was not born in Minnesota. And, and the thing is, because people hate...
I could have figured that out from your novel.
Because people hate me, because I actually, criticize things that need to be criticized, they've had so many trolls over the years remove it. There were actually times, if you go back 10 years ago or whatever, the information was more accurate. But Wikipedia doesn't care about accurate information, just verifiable. So if you wrote something with wrong information, that's verifiable, even if it's wrong. Getting back to the wrestling. So they use the high school gym used to host WWF dark cards. And I once saw Andre the Giant wrestle like 15 or 20 midget wrestlers. And you have to understand, back in the 70s, midgets were making a lot of money from these weird things. There was a thing called midget.
There was a midget wrestling show that came through here like 2 months ago.
One that just came here. But there was a thing called dwarf tossing, where people a midget would be in a harness, and these big, super strong guys, like from the Strongest Man's competition, would be throwing the dwarves. Then there was a thing called midget bowling, where they would strap it in and they throw a midget down and bowl.
Well, it's like, and we were talking about Sawdust and Tinsel. There's that group of carny midgets in the Bergman film, in Sawdust and Tinsel, I think it is. Is that the one with the group of the carny midgets?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are.
Yeah, I hope I'm using the right term. I don't know if midget is.
Well,
acceptable.
if you get to the point where you read Norwegian, I have a character called Bit von Reingold who is a dwarf Jewish pornographer, but he hates the word dwarf. He prefers midget because he thinks dwarf makes him a magical being. So, and his motto is
interesting.
His motto is, "I'm a perverse little Jew that just likes women to shit on me." literally, because he's so he's one of my great characters because in there there's a 900,000 word uh, uh, digression from the main narrative where Bit von Reingold is doing drugs with what's his name, Dennis Hopper, and a few other people, and he goes tripping through.
There's an actor to do drugs with in that time. I guess Dennis Hopper's the right pick.
And so the dwarf character goes tripping through American literature, meeting like Tom Sawyer.
I've heard you. I can't wait to read that. Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Now people would say 900,000 words. It's so long, and it's one of the things in a book like that, and even with Vincetti Brothers, is like I have the legend teller thing in Tumbleweeds.
Right.
You can pick, when I do these big novels.
And you're the legend teller, right?
It's possible that it's an older version of Manny Cole, but again, it doesn't need an answer.
No, it doesn't. But I just wanted to guess because it's fun to talk to the artist who wrote something with something to guess at and say.
But here's the thing I'll tell you. I deliberately in a lot of the books leave things up in the air. In fact, I killed off Bit von Reingold in an earlier book called Bit of Golem, and I brought him back, and I'd forgotten I killed him off in that book, and so I had to retroactively make it that I often have different voices, and we don't know where something's coming from.
Yeah.
I mentioned that center of mass.
Which is true. I know you don't like to say, I know you don't agree with like artist truth, but that's true. Just like in the telling of history and just the retelling of stories, like the accuracy is not always there. And I think,
and if you want to be realistic, it has to be inaccurate. And this is what I said about forgetting. To not only forget the specifics of a story, but the reason that it's good to do that is it enhances the realism. And if I'm in a different book in a different time with a different character talking about another character from another book in a different time, of course it's going. If let's say I never hear from you again after this interview or when you publish this piece, and 15 years later, someone asked me, Dan, whatever happened to that kid that interviewed you that one time? Do you still hear from him? I said, no, I never have. I don't know whatever happened to him, but that's the way life is. People flutter in and flutter out. Life is an ephemeral thing.
Well, I'll be sending you the rewritten version of my screenplay, so we'll hopefully you'll read that for me.
Here's the thing: is don't rewrite it in just a week's time. Take your time. No,
I'm not.
If it's 6 months or 9 months from now, that's better, because I literally have had people. One time I made the mistake. This kid in England, he wrote a mediocre poem, and he kept saying, I kept saying, this doesn't work for that. He wanted to be on the page in Cosmoetica where I have poetry, new poetry. I forget what I call it, but it ended up that he's emailed me 20 times, and I said that, well, if you did this, it ended up that literally 80% of the poem I wrote. So I put it up on my fucking website just to get rid of him. It's like, but I literally wrote 80% of it by improving it.
I'm just gonna take with really the main things. I'm gonna take with what you told me. The names, changing some of the names. Those are things that I didn't even notice. Kevorkian was intentional. Jim Patterson was not
James
intentional.
Patterson is a famous mystery writer.
I know. Once you said that, I was like, that's like my dad's favorite fucking author. I've read one of his books, and that was enough. But so yeah, change that one. And I do like what you said about the start, because a couple of I've had other people read it who liked it more than you, but they're not, as critical, nor if they've read as much or smart in literature. But they kind of said the beginning was bumpy. So I think taking out that scene and going straight into that has made my pacing a lot better. Like on my rewrite right now, like I said, I think I'm at 19 pages, but I'm kind of close to the point in the other version where I was about at 40 pages.
Okay.
Yeah. So hopefully that helps it out quite a bit. I thought it was interesting. You said Cohen and Cormac. I wasn't really going for Cohen. Cormac for sure. I love his books.
Well, see, to me,
And
Cormac McCarthy is sort of
what do
like
you think about him? I've never heard you talk about him.
I say he's sort of like William Faulkner. He overwrites. He tends to go for the cheap gore. That's not to say that he doesn't. Just like with Faulkner, he can have a really terrific paragraph, but then you'll go
Yeah,
14, 18 pages for the next nugget.
yeah,
And to me, he's sort of a more modern Faulkner in that way. They're very similar writers, I think, in that regard.
yeah.
Um,
I feel
so
like Suttrie's a great
who?
book. Suttrie's
I didn't read that. I rode the one the horses.
for all the pretty horses,
Yeah,
the Blood Meridian.
the Meridian. And what's the
Yeah.
third one on the plane?
Oh, the road's popular. No,
The
it's
Road
on
is
the
a
plane.
bad book.
Yeah, the boat's bad. The
It's
road's bad.
it's a bloated bad Twilight Zone
Yeah,
episode.
the road was not good. That's the most popular one. Like when I
Well,
ask
because it's
people,
only what 120 pages.
yeah, when I and it won something, didn't it? Did it win a Pulitzer? I don't know.
Yeah, I
Right.
think it did.
I mean, look,
Another guy.
Pulitzer Prize winner right
Yeah.
there. Yeah,
Yeah, another guy who's very overrated is Don DeLillo. I read
I like White Noise.
I well I the only one that I read is Underworld. And it starts off with that good. What it started off as a short story, the
Yeah,
1951 baseball game, the playoff between the Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers, and that's a good a solid thing. But then it just totally fucks up. Now that
yeah,
having been said, that the things I can say against McCarthy or DeLillo, they're way better than David Foster Wallace. I mean,
yeah.
he's just a total piece of shit. Dave Eggers a shit. William Volman a piece of shit. Thomas Pynchon.
I
Their
know you don't like tension.
their stuff is
Uh,
just if you want if you read
I don't want to debate you, but have you read Vineland by Pynchon?
no, but I will tell you, to get back to Gravity's Rainbow. Just read. I mentioned Vonnegut. Read Slaughterhouse
Slaughterhouse
Five.
Five's better.
Slaughterhouse Five is 1/5 the length, and it's
Yes,
the same basic story.
I agree. I agree. And it's yeah, I agree. When I read
I read
when I
Mason
first
and Dixon. That was the other one I read, and
I
that
have trouble getting through that one.
I can't remember what it's about.
I have trouble getting through that
For
one.
example, like with David Foster Wallace, all I remember about that piece of shit that well, I read The King in His Room or whatever the last
the Pale
the
King.
Pale King. Yeah, I read the one that he did. He did notes on a science book. Then there's one that was
I
some
haven't read
short
that.
stories that were terrible. And then with Infinite Jest, I remember Quebec, tennis, a few other. This is the thing when something
There's some things I like about Infinite Jest, but I feel like with most of his other work, I agree with you.
with well, I mean, it's a juvenile book.
Yeah.
There's no development of character. If you don't have character, you don't have a story.
Yeah, that's fair. The ending, I was so mad when I finished that book. The ending was horrible.
Well, when you read A Norwegian in the Family, that is not. I'll say there's a difference between great and best. I've written better stuff, but
Uh-huh.
it's the greatest. Well, when I finished Vincetti Brothers, I said to myself, I just wrote the greatest novel ever written. Then a few years later, I wrote A Norwegian in the Family, which is over 4 times as long. And if you look at it, it does everything. I throw everything in the kitchen sink.
Yeah.
It's not only the greatest novel written, it's the greatest postmodern novel, and I would argue
Okay.
it's the greatest work of art that one single artist has ever produced. Because when you look at these super long books that are over 1 million words, if you go on Wikipedia, the longest books ever, they're all gimmick writing. You know, there's like a book called The Book. It's the word "the" written, like 10 million times.
What?
The book. It's called. There's a novel.
That's real?
Yes, with the word "the." It's the only word 10 million times.
Why? What's the point of it?
They get to say.
What is the point of that? Can you tell me? 'Cause I don't know.
Look it up. Look, and then there's like a 100 million word novel. A guy who was a bad poet who wrote a book. A Richard. He wrote. He's got something. Oh, what the hell is his name? I don't have all the stuff with me, but a bad
Okay.
poet wrote this book, and it's just throwing lots. But anyway, if we're talking about a real novel, if you've ever read Proust's Remembrance of Things Past or In Search of Lost Time, my book is almost double the length. But the thing is, I don't have I often said with Proust, it's 300 pages of great writing and 3,000 of shit.
Okay. So, so Pinchon, I've heard several of your rants about him because it seems like people like to get you to rant. I don't want you to rant about him, but I do want to. One thing that I thought your novel did really well, Tumbleweeds, and as an American novel, and you write in the beginning of Vincetti Brothers that you considered a great American novel, and I think it is too. It reminds me of Twain. I think I told you it also reminds me of Dickens, who is the novel
American, that it's closest to
novelist.
The novel it's closest to is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, because there's actually
I've never read that.
You have to read it. It's the greatest 20th century novel written by a woman in America. But there's actually a scene that in Tumbleweeds, if you remember, where I have my dad character. I think is delivering stuff to vaccinations or something, and it's very similar to a scene. And I had forgotten about it, but it's very similar to a scene in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. But that's set in 1915 or whatever it is, whereas mine is set in the 1960s. But that. If we're talking published novels, leaving me out of it, I would say Moby Dick, Slaughterhouse-Five, Huckleberry Finn, and A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. That's your Mount Rushmore of great novels up until the mid-20th century. And the greatest of them is Moby Dick, because it's the longest. It does the most.
I'm trying to think. Oh man, it'd be so hard for me to pick a Mount Rushmore. See, I'm kind of in that vein where I love the Russian moralists. Like I love Anna Karenina. I love The Idiot. I love The Idiot.
The Idiot. There's like Crime and Punishment, and there's the other one. Is it The Idiot?
Dossier. The brother Karamazov is the other.
Karamazov. I mean, they're but I'll give you an example. Crime and Punishment's ending just is we don't need to see him in the camp at the end.
I agree completely. When the first time I read that novel was a couple years ago. It was a friend told me to read it. Yeah. I read it and I said I didn't need the epilogue.
But
I didn't need the epilogue.
You want to know what the worst ending in a piece of art that can be considered great is? Do you want it to? It's a film. Go ahead. See if you can guess it. The worst. This is what I would pick, but
Rashomon.
Yes. The ending with the and the baby,
everything about
and it's like, what the fuck? You have just done not only a great movie, but you've done a great movie that's breaking the then boundaries of what film can do.
So all these different points of view,
and you go to the most mawkish, shitty piece of symbolism. The last 2 minutes take that from arguably his best film down to maybe number 10.
What do you think is his best film?
The best film would be High and Low.
Yeah.
High and Low is the best crime drama ever. Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, I actually, that's like one of the ones I haven't seen.
Yeah. High and Low, the ending, and I don't believe
I'm going to watch it tonight, though. I actually plan to watch that film tonight.
Okay, so, but I don't want to spoil it for you, but I don't believe
it's spoiled.
But when you see the ending, literally the last 5 or 10 seconds is just a fantastic. Another great film that's often overlooked, and I think Kurosawa is better in his modern films actually than in his epics, his historical epics. Yeah. The Bad Sleep Well. If you want to,
watched that recently.
Yes,
that's a great film.
I mean here, 60 years ago, more than 60 years ago,
in Japan,
we're shown the evils of corporations.
Crony capitalism. Yeah, it's a total takedown of crony capitalism via Hamlet.
And the thing is, if you've ever read The Devil's Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce, it says, it gives humorous definitions. It says a corporation, an ingenious tool meant to minimize responsibility and maximize profit, or something like that. The Bad Sleep Well shows this perfectly. and it shows because the big bad is a vice president we never see. It's not the guy who's the big bad within most of the film. He answers. He's just an errand boy.
Well, I think the first time you see the vice president, he's introduced as a nice guy. He's with his daughter, right?
But he's not the vice president. He's the vice president is the guy at the end where the bad guy is talking to him, and you can hear just from the way he's on the phone. He's a bootlicker, and he could be crushed by the vice president. That's such a great film, and another great film, contemporary film, Ikiru. Talk about a tearjerker. Ikiru. Awesome.
Death of a bureaucrat.
And this is why it's so difficult because these are such fantastic films. And then of course Seven Samurai, Rashomon minus the last 2 minutes.
I like Throne of Blood and Ran a lot.
They're very good, but the one before Ran I think is even better. The one in color.
How do you pronounce Kagemusha?
Kagamusha, that's right.
Kagamusha. Yeah, that's a good one too.
That's a fantastic film too. Redbeard is another great film, and
I haven't watched that one.
And Mifune is such a fucking great actor.
Yeah, he's the best.
I mean, he's got a number of those kind of the stuff where he's the master, and but when he's playing a straight character like he does in Redbeard or a couple of the other films, it shows what a terrific act in High and Low.
Yeah. Okay, I'd say I've never seen it. I've watched the first half of it several times, but I just don't have the time to finish it when I've watched it. So I know this.
He is so good in High and Low.
Yeah.
And this is how it makes you wonder. For
example, what about Stray Dog? What do you think about Stray Dog? It's the one where he's the cop and he loses his gun. And it's a late 40s noir film.
It's a good, solid film. I don't remember it that much. The first one that he did, I remember there's one where they're on the mountainside with snow. I forget the name of that film. I don't think the early 40s. Rashomon is though when he becomes a master. Other than the 2 minutes there. But
that's
anyway.
Funny. He's great. So, what do you think about Lynch?
I mean, Mulholland Drive. I want to see two gorgeous girls finger each other or whatever.
So there was So Mulholland Drive. I thought about what you wrote in the beginning of Vincetti Brothers. This is a note I have where you wrote, "Now I think I'm more apt to do a longer, more complex tale that's akin to the shit that Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and all them Russian novelists from the 19th century did. The Russian Moronov, you get it." And then you say something about a great writer like myself would want to dwarf someone like Cervantes or Shakespeare, just as Beethoven did not back down from Mozart. Is Mulholland Drive, is Lynch not backing down from Bergman and Fellini?
He's not doing anything even remotely similar. I mean,
I think it's very similar to Persona.
Well, then you
have the director character, which reminds me of
there's no fundament of the characters. It's very obvious. It's something. This is what happens sometimes when you have a bit. Because if you know the back, you don't have to know this, because I think the film itself is so chock full and Swiss cheese plot hole wise in terms of and I've read many of the people theorizing they know what it's really about or whether, but
I think it's about an emotion.
But what happens is this was supposed to be his television series. It was supposed to be a TV series. And so what he did, he filmed 4 or 5 episodes and then edited it down. It's basically a Reader's Digest condensed version of the first 5 episodes or whatever of the series he was supposed to do. And what he's relying on is when I say something like, I don't need to answer every question in a novel, he's saying, oh, that's good. I don't have to have any basis for an artistic rationale for anything, because I can then say as an artist, well, I'm not going to explain it. But there's a difference when you fill in enough that for example, if you look at what you might call the lacunae narratively in some of my books or in other great works of art, like someone like Wells does, what you can do, you can reasonably fill things in, and there might be 3 or 4 different ways you can view it, something. But when you have this big gaping hole, and it's infinitely fillable. That's
Yeah.
telling you that what the artist is doing is pawning off the creationary, the ideation on the reader or the viewer. And
I see what you mean.
um,
And there's
now a
something
better one.
about that. But I
Hold
think
on. What's the one he did with Hopper as the?
Blue Velvet.
Okay, that's not a great film, and it starred my friend George Dickerson. In fact,
Okay, cool.
but that's a better
That's
film
neat.
than Mulholland Drive.
Oh, I probably like Mulholland Drive more just because I think like what I was saying. I think it goes for it's going. I like what he's swinging for. I think it's a big swing. I don't think he completely knocks it out of the park, but I think it's a good try, and I like that. I wouldn't. And so
then
as far as
then Eraserhead, that one is
what about Twin Peaks?
The Fire
All of
Walks
it.
with Me movie or the TV show.
All of it, all of it.
I found it boring. It's like
Yeah.
Twin Peaks. Like here's another thing. I can't stand the idea when people talk about the cable TV golden era. Get the fuck out. Lost was a piece of shit. The
Oh, yeah,
Sopranos
Lost
is totally unrealistic. The Mad Men was a good soap opera. Its first 3 years. Seasons 4 and 5 were
Breaking
bad.
Bad is good.
And I didn't watch the last 2 because it was going in the dumpster. Not Better Call Saul. What was the one? It was
Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad. Again,
It's good.
laughably, these people clearly, like I said with the Brokeback Mountain, that writer never met a male homosexual. These people have never talked with, or what they'll do is, we went to a prison and we asked people who involved in the drug trade this or that. It's like with Goodfellas. There are so many bullshit stories in Goodfellas that are stories that I, as a kid, when I was 10, 12, heard about gangsters that are used here. That Scorsese, who didn't know anything about gangsters, just threw in because he thought that was what really happened. I'll give you an example. You know that scene in
Goodfellas, a lot of it comes from Pileggi.
who bullshat himself.
Okay,
You know that
Talk
scene.
about that. Let me hear that.
You know
Let me
that
hear that.
scene.
Talk about Pileggi.
Well, I want to talk about this scene.
Okay.
The main character, the guy who died, Ray Liotta's child character. I don't know who the actor was, but there's that scene where he loses his cherry and he goes to court, and outside the court, he the mobs is all grabbed.
Yeah.
That would never happen.
Never.
When I was a kid, I worked in a mob place. I didn't even know the names of the people who ran the fucking warehouse that I worked in, much less knowing what capo they worked for. That would never happen. And if that did really happen, that would be a mobster that deserved to go to jail because he'd be.
So you think it's this Henry Hill guy who's full of shit?
Henry? Of course. You know with the
I
Godfather.
agree. I've seen his interviews.
You know with the Godfather. They said how that was just Shakespearean stuff made up by Coppola. But what happened is the real gangsters then took that and they started acting the part because they, in terms of have you ever heard the mafia didn't deal drugs? They were fucking dealing drugs from the 1920s onward. This idea that they didn't want to deal drugs is total bullshit. See, now I'm getting
The Godfather.
See how I shifted into the sociological stuff from these films, but.
Yeah. But no, that's great. I love to hear that, and I love to hear someone who has that knowledge of that because a lot of my knowledge of that comes from those films. And one of the things I noticed when I got a little further into Tumbleweeds and started reading. I haven't finished the Vincetti Brothers, but I'm reading it right now. Is that they're the first good novels that approach mobs that I've read. I feel like
I think they're both crime novels, Norwegian and this one.
Yeah.
But they're not crime novels in the sense that like Elmore Leonard writes. And Elmore Leonard is actually not a bad writer. If you want to talk about who's going to be read in 2100 of published writers, I'll guarantee you Elmore Leonard will not only be read, but he'll be considered literarily higher than Foster Wallace or Pynchon. Because
what about Chandler? What do you think about Raymond Chandler? He's earlier, but what do you think about his crime novels?
I've only read 1 or 2 of his stuff. I mean, he's good. Dashiell Hammett was good, but
again, I think his stuff's good.
They are to crime novels what Isaac Asimov and Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke were to sci-fi. And I think
I've read more of Asimov's nonfiction than I have his
Well,
fiction.
yeah,
His
he wrote like
nonfiction is really
550
good.
books or something. So
Yeah, like he has a book. He has a nonfiction book called The Roman Republic. That's like probably my favorite history book on the Roman Republic I've ever read.
have you ever read
Uh,
Gibbon?
uh-uh.
Edward Gibbon, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
I need to read that one.
Historically, a lot of people will pick it apart, and it's true that it's pretty bad history.
Mhm.
150 years on, we know things that were false, and he probably made stuff up. But if you're talking about a good read, you don't have Isaac Asimov's Foundation without
Mhm.
Gibbon and the decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
Okay.
It's a monumental work. It's like, what is it, 15, 20 volumes? Maybe it's only 12 volumes, depending on, it's one of those things, depending on how big the thing is, it might be, 12 books or 20 books, depending on
Yeah.
how it's broken up. But
Yeah. So so let's see what else we could talk about. How much time do you have? How long
I
do you
can
want
go,
to
I can
go?
go, I can go. I'm off. I told you. So yeah, I've checked off everything I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I've gotten the main things from my story. We talked to. I do want to talk a little bit more about your. I want to talk about poetry as an art form right now. Is it? And I don't want to say like I know it's like a lot of people say it's dead or whatever. What do you think? Who are there great poets right now?
That have been published in the last 30 or 40 years. No,
Would you
because
consider rappers poets?
in the same way that you could consider, Dr. Seuss a poet. I mean, it's
Well,
not.
no. Like, have you or someone like New York State of Mind? Have you ever read the lyrics to that song by Nas?
Well, now you're getting into the territory talking about like Bob Dylan winning the Nobel Prize for Literature. I mean, it's
No, I
not
wouldn't
literature.
agree. I'm just saying, like, if they're, I'm not what I'm saying. I'm not saying they're great poets. What I'm saying is, if there's any decent poetry I've heard during my lifetime, it's come from
Well,
rappers.
well, I'll tell you. Jim Morrison's song lyrics for The Doors were better than his actual published poetry.
Yeah,
But the thing
right.
with a song lyric is that the song lyric depends upon the emotional glue of the music. When you
Hmm.
just have you what poems have you only read the poems on Cosmoetica?
Yeah, I think that's all I have
Because
access to. Yeah.
I have a poem. I can't say the N word, but I have a poem called an SPIC. It's my ninth murder poem, I think.
Yeah,
An
I get the
SPIC.
idea.
Yeah, and there, this is I really saw this. There was a place. Speaking of mafia stuff, I lived just a block away from what was called Atlas Terminal. It was the biggest drug dealing center on the East Coast back in the 60s and 70s. And there would be blacks and Hispanics that would come to get from the mafia guys and whatnot. And me and my friends would hang out on the railroad tracks, and the kids, we'd see this stuff. And I remember one night, the Spanish guy and this black guy got into some fucking argument. They pulled out switchblades, and they're doing the sharks and the jets kind of thing from
Yeah, like a
that
West Side
musical.
Story.
Yeah, but it and and I forget now 40 some years later, 45 years later, I forget which guy stabbed which guy, and we saw them fell, and we just got the fuck out of here because one of those guys is a killer or whatnot. But I decided to write it, and the most interesting part in there is I have the refrain, "Aloner than a girl amongst old boys." So within that milieu that's dealing with urban poverty, racism, I sneak in a little thing about the male aggressive trait to it, and these are the kinds of things you don't see. You could, and I've read that poem out loud when I back in the '90s in Minnesota when I wrote that, and you could people would be talking and then midway through that poem, once I used the epithets, the SPIC and the N word, people stopped and they listen, but then you could see the faces, and this is one of the things I really enjoyed about reading. Not that I was a great reader, but I wrote great poetry, so I just had to be an adequate reader. I didn't have to go yo, I didn't have to do all that histrionic stuff.
Performance.
But you when you get them and you make a loud room silent, that tells you all you need to know about the work itself.
Yeah. Um, I've never been to a poetry reading or anything like that. I mean, I don't
Don't
even
go to
know if
any
that's a thing
modern
that.
ones.
Yeah, I wouldn't. It doesn't sound like something I'd want to go to.
There was. Have you ever
Um,
heard of a group called the New Eurekans?
uh,
Back in the early '90s, MTV had a thing called spoken word with the New Eurekans. It was on for 2 or 3 years. I knew a girl there named Maggie Estep. She died about 10 years ago. Um, that was all fucked up. They all of these kinds of groups, whether it's beatniks or these New Eurekans or whatnot.
yeah.
All it is, they don't care about the art. All
Yeah, I
they
feel
want
like
to do is
people
promote
aren't
themselves.
serious. That's one of the things I noticed when like I've gone to like filmmaking. They have like happy hours, or even like there's this group, and they do great stuff. They put on great films, and it's great for the arts here in Arkansas. But they'll have like events where they'll play a film and people will come see it. And just some of the people there is just they're not serious about it. Some guy who has a podcast, who is sitting next to you. You ask him like what his favorite film is, and it's who even something that came out within the last 10 years. But he's a film critic,
Mm.
and he has a podcast, and it's just like it's a lot of people who aren't serious about it, and it almost feels like to find people who are serious about it, you got to naturally find them within your life.
Well, if you
or
want to
just
see, if
meet
you
them
want to see,
online, talk to someone
if
like
you want
you.
to see good films, you have to go outside of the U.S. The
Absolutely.
fellow who won for 12 Years a Slave. That's a very good film, maybe it was the best film Hollywood made. But his two earlier films, especially the one Shame,
McQueen.
yeah, Steve McQueen, yeah,
Yeah.
his film Shame is about it's not it's about this guy who has no control over his life. He's a sex addict and whatnot. It's really good. But I'll tell you, the living filmmaker who's arguably the best is a Turkish guy named Nuri Bilge Ceylan, and his last film was a bit of a downer compared to some of the other films, but it's still a very good to excellent film.
I've never even heard of him.
Once Upon a Time in Anatolia is a great fucking film. Winter Sleep is a great film. Climates. Look him up. If you have Criterion Collection, he might be on it. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know if he is.
But he's someone who does a lot of stuff talking. His last film, which I said was not quite as good as some of the other stuff, is about a guy who's basically a pedophile but never acts on it. And you get hints of that throughout the movie, and other stuff happens. But at the end, he gets into this rapturous soliloquy about this 12 or 14-year-old girl in his class that he lusts for, but he's never acted upon it. But he acts as if they have some kind of relationship, which he spends the movie denying that he did anything inappropriate, which he never touched the girl or whatnot. But it's about his having these feelings for these girls, this girl, and yeah. So he's got the. Technically, I guess because you hit puberty, he'd be a hebophile or an ephebophile. That's a bit older than, because a pedophile technically is someone who likes children prepubescent. But so there's a lot, even though that's not one of his top films, it's still gargantuan leagues beyond Hollywood. And I have to mention one of the most underrated films of all time is The Killing of a Chinese Bookie by John Cassavetes, the long version. The longer, you've seen it?
Yeah, of course.
There's that great monologue he does with the strippers at the end, the black girl at the house where he's been shot, and he's just going on.
Yeah.
Man, that's really.
That's great drama. I love that, and I love Opening Night. I think those are his two best.
Yes,
films.
that and Faces are the three great ones.
Okay, so maybe I need to watch Faces again. Because I thought Faces was really good, I think I missed a couple beats. It's pretty I guess experimental for when it came out.
And it's a very downbeat, and the ending though, where the husband walks out, his wife is slumped on the stairs, and he just walks out, and that's it. Now some people will talk about Nicky and Mikey, which was done by Elaine, what's her name, and then
it's all right.
And Husbands has some good stuff, but it's not. But to me, the three that are just total. And people will always talk about the one with Jenna Rollins as Under the Influence, a woman under the influence.
Under the influence.
But that's a little too over the top for me.
Yeah, I don't like it as much as opening night or Bookie or
Yeah,
even.
and opening night is underrated. And I took and when you
That's an
read,
art piece. That's an art film
yeah,
more than it is, yeah,
yeah, I
which
actually
is
took the
cool.
scene where he kills the bookie and I reworked that into what I call the Massapequa massacre at the end of the
Oh,
Machete Brothers.
dude, the scene when he realizes he has to kill the bookie,
Yeah.
and they tell him, you know what I mean? That's such a good scene.
And here's a perfect example of a film. We don't know anything past, other than he's the strip club owner. How
Right?
does this
Yeah.
guy
You don't know
he,
shit.
yeah, how does this guy know how to get away with a murder? He outsmarts sort of on the fly the 3 or 4 guards that this bookie has, and it's like, so, but we don't need to know it. Why do you need to know it? Doesn't it make it more interesting to theorize? Well, he was a Korean War vet, or
Yeah.
maybe he was a hired killer at some point. We don't know,
Yeah.
and you don't have to know. What really is terrible in modern art is this obsessive desire to know every fucking trick that is going to be made. Why?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? Why do you
Yeah.
need to know everything?
I think part of that is just like having people having the internet and the access to everything. And like, people do interviews and they'll say everything. Some artists will. They'll do an interview and they'll say everything their film's about.
Now, there are some times in my art, though, where I'll have a character didactically. For example, I did my first children's book. I mentioned Baby and Buddy. I did a book, do I have it right here? Let me see. Oh, yeah. It's called A Kid's Book. And that's my cat,
Okay.
Oscar. He died a few years ago. And in the book, I have a kids-only version and I have an adult version. And it's basically about Oscar. Oscar's owner is not me in the book. It's another character gets pregnant, and he thinks that his mom isn't going to love him because of the new child that is coming. So he runs away and has some adventures. He comes back,
Cool.
but there's an outer adult thing where I have a couple of characters who are stupid who are reading the book along with it. Now they express things that some people have said aren't needed or didactic, and I agree with that in one sense. But when you put the two, when you put the adult version there, it's dealing with things that aren't expressed in the book, but it expands the cosmos of the work too. So
Yeah.
and you have to, like I said, you have to just not do the same old. You have to take chances, and so few artists take chances. They don't enjoy the art that they make. They don't enjoy art. They look at art as political statements only. And you can have, you mentioned for Tumbleweeds, Vincetti Brothers, everything is going to have some tinges of the political, some tinges of the
Well,
religious.
if it's a true, if it's a story that's based in reality at a certain point in time, there's the political environment the story exists in, and I really think there's really not much more that needs to be done outside of that. You have the political environment the story exists in, and if it comes into the story, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so anyway, on to the next thing. What else do you have on your list?
What do you think about Robert Altman?
Some stuff was very good. MASH was a very good film. Nashville is a very good film. The Player is a good film. McCabe and Mrs. Miller is not a particularly good film.
You don't like it?
Well, no. Again, like this, like
Okay.
when you're talking about, don't go there. But the one he does with Philip Marlowe, that's another.
The Long Goodbye.
Yeah, that's another one that's so very hit and miss. It's like when he's at his worst, he's like Night of the Hunter with Charles Lawton, that Charles Lawton film. It's too obvious. He's at his best when he's more subversive. A terrible movie that Altman did was the one of Vincent Van Gogh. He has this overweening music.
I haven't even seen that one.
It's ugh.
I'll make sure I don't watch it.
Well, no, watch it because you need to know why something fails. It's as important
That's true.
to know
true.
why something succeeds.
I go to the movies often enough though today to see it on a weekly basis. To be honest with you, why a movie fails, but I think, but yeah, it is interesting to watch good artists when make something bad sometimes, or
Well,
struggle.
this is the thing I said is the most important kind of art, if you want to learn, isn't great art and it's not bad art. It's near great art because
Okay.
when you have the near great, you're able to see what's working. But you all when you have that few moments where it fails and it falls to not great, you can peek behind the curtain and see the mechanism. It's more obvious because you have something great, but something is not quite ticking. It's like Rashomon. Uh, that bad ending so starkly puts into relief why the rest of the film works, and fortunately, Kurosawa learned because he never again had a bad ending, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, no, his endings are always fantastic. I'm trying to think of any other things I want to ask you about. I mean, there's things I can go all day about films and novels. I mean, you've already given me your Mount Rushmore of novels. So you said Moby Dick. You said A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. What were the other two?
Slaughterhouse-Five and Huckleberry Finn.
Okay, yeah, those are good. Those are good. What's
Now,
your
two
favorite?
two of them, Huckleberry Finn and Moby Dick, are probably in a lot of people's.
Yeah,
People would probably more argue with Vonnegut and Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Probably is not even
yeah.
mentioned.
I'm the only one I haven't read. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Let's see. Yeah, that
But
pretty much
Huckleberry
sums
Finn is
up
a
a
good
lot.
example of something that's
Yeah.
great. It's a great book. Is it a great novel? I mean, it doesn't. It's
Okay.
arguably has misses some beats here and there, but and this is another thing. There's a fundamental difference between a great work of art and a perfect
Yeah.
work of art. A perfect work of art means you've hit all the technical points. But if
What's
it's
a perfect work of art?
what
What's a perfect work of art?
I have a poem called Congolian Footfalls. That's a perfect poem, but the poem itself is only about a dream state. It's a dream fugue, and it perfectly
Uh-huh.
captures the way I and other people have told me they've dreamt. But there isn't anything deeper. Now you could make an argument that makes it great, maybe, but if it is, it just barely gets over. But I've had poems and I that when I look back, I say, oh, I should have changed that word. Oh, they were
Yeah.
early great poems. Like I've got a free verse sonnet called "War," which is about when I saw this woman running around the corner naked and bloody, and a car came screaming around the corner, pulled her in and drove away. This was every day. When I was a kid, I was picked up by people in black sedans. Some of them legal cops or FBI people, or sometimes just gangsters that picked me up.